October 24, 1944, 10:27 a.m. The Sibian Sea. The horizon erupts. Not with thunder from Musashi's 18-inch guns, but with the shriek of American Hellcats tearing through monsoon clouds at 300 knots. On the battleship's deck, sailors crane their necks skyward as black dots multiply into dozens, then hundreds. The air vibrates with engine roar. Anti-aircraft crews spin their guns frantically, but the enemy isn't coming from one direction. They're everywhere. Inside the armored citadel, Captain Toshihira Inoguchi grips the command rail. His ship, 72,000 tons of steel, myth, and imperial pride, has never tasted defeat. Her armor is thicker than any fortress. Her guns can obliterate cruisers at 20 miles. For 3 years, her mere existence has haunted Allied strategists. Unsinkable, they whispered, untouchable. But what's descending from the sky isn't bravery or luck. It's mathematics, precision. A classified American doctrine born from hard lessons and cold logic. You don't kill a giant with one blow. You drown it in coordinated chaos. The first wave banks hard left. Torpedo bombers skim the water at masthead height. Dive bombers scream down from 12,000 feet. Fighters strafe the superstructure, keeping gunners pinned. And behind them, 3 more carrier groups are already launching. If you love untold stories where strategy rewrites destiny, hit subscribe, because what happens next rewrote naval warfare forever. To understand how Musashi died, you must first understand what she was. Laid down in secrecy at Mitsubishi's Nagasaki shipyard in 1938, Musashi belonged to the Yamato class, the largest, most heavily armed battleships ever constructed. Her main battery, 9 18.1-inch guns, capable of hurling 3,200-pound shells 26 miles. Her armor belt, 16 inches of hardened steel, designed to shrug off any shell afloat. Displacement, over 72,000 tons fully loaded. She was a floating fortress, a symbol of Japan's technological supremacy and unshakable will. But by 1944, the war had shifted beneath her keel. The aircraft carrier had become the new king of naval combat. At Midway in 1942, Japanese carriers fell to American dive bombers before their guns ever fired. At the Philippine Sea in June 1944, U.S. carrier aircraft obliterated over 600 Japanese planes in what pilots grimly called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The message was clear: control of the sky meant control of the sea. Yet Japanese doctrine clung to the past. Battleships remained the centerpiece of fleet operations. Musashi and her sister Yamato were tasked with one final desperate mission: break through the American fleet guarding Leyte Gulf and annihilate the landing forces supporting MacArthur's return to the Philippines. It was called Operation Shogo. Victory or annihilation. There would be no middle ground. The Americans had learned their lesson the hard way. Early in the Pacific War, carrier strikes against Japanese capital ships were chaotic affairs. Squadrons arrived piecemeal, attacking independently without coordination. Torpedo planes came in first, getting shredded by anti-aircraft fire before bombers arrived. Dive bombers attacked from random angles, allowing battleship captains to maneuver and dilute damage. Fighters wandered off chasing Zeros instead of suppressing AA guns. The result? Heavy American losses for minimal enemy damage. But pain teaches faster than theory. By 1944, U.S. Navy tacticians, led by innovators like Admiral Mark Mitcher and his air coordinators, had refined a brutal new doctrine: the coordinated anvil strike. Multiple carrier groups would launch simultaneously, converging on a target from different vectors at staggered intervals. Torpedo bombers attacked low and opposite, forcing the target to turn and exposing vulnerable sections of hull. While the ship was mid-turn, dive bombers struck from above, hitting decks and superstructure when anti-aircraft crews were focused elsewhere. Fighters circled constantly, strafing exposed gun positions and radar arrays. Then, and this was the killer detail, a second wave launched before the first even returned. Then a third, then a fourth. No recovery time, no regrouping, no breathing room. It was industrial-scale air warfare applied to naval targets. And on October 24th, Musashi would become its test case. Admiral William Bull Halsey commanded the U.S. Third Fleet, an armada of 16 fast carriers, 6 battleships, and over 1,000 aircraft. His mission: locate and destroy the approaching Japanese fleet before it reached Leyte Gulf. When reconnaissance planes spotted Musashi's task force threading through the Sibuyan Sea, Halsey gave a simple order: launch everything. Task Force 38, divided into 4 carrier groups spread across 300 miles of ocean, began coordinating the largest concentrated airstrike against a single ship in naval history. Carriers USS Intrepid, Essex, Lexington, Enterprise, and Franklin turned into the wind. Flight decks roared with activity. Ordnance crews loaded armor-piercing bombs and Mark 13 torpedoes. Pilots received coordinates, altitude assignments, and timing windows. This wasn't revenge, it was procedure. Each carrier group operated semi-independently, but within a master timeline. Group 1 would strike first, forcing Musashi to maneuver. Group 2 would arrive 12 minutes later, hitting her while she was mid-turn. Group 3 would exploit whatever damage had been inflicted. Group 4 would finish what remained. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, it was annihilation. And Musashi's crew? They had no idea this doctrine even existed. Japanese intelligence had captured individual reports of carrier strikes, but never grasped the system behind them. They were sailing into a tactical revolution, armed with yesterday's assumptions. At 10:20 a.m., Musashi's radar operators detected the first wave. 68 aircraft inbound from the southeast. Captain Inaguchi ordered flank speed, 27 knots, and initiated evasive zigzag patterns. Around him, the task force scattered into defensive formation. Cruiser Tone moved to starboard. Destroyers Kiyoshimo and Hamikaze took flanking positions, their smaller guns adding volume to the AA screen. Musashi's anti-aircraft battery was formidable. 130 guns, ranging from 25mm machine cannons to 127mm dual-purpose mounts. Ammunition lockers were full. Fire control radar was operational. Crew morale, despite exhaustion and dwindling supplies, remained high. They had trained for this. Every sailor knew his station, his arc of fire, his backup position if primary guns were destroyed. But doctrine assumed one attack, maybe 2. The first American formation split at 5 miles out. Torpedo bombers, Grumman Avengers, dropped to wave-top altitude, approaching from both port and starboard simultaneously. This forced Musashi into a tactical dilemma. Turn toward one group to comb the wakes of their torpedoes and expose your beam to the other group. Stay straight, and both spreads would have optimal angles. Captain Inaguchi chose left rudder. Musashi's bow swung hard to port, her massive hull carving white foam as 18 torpedoes churned through the water toward her starboard quarter. The killing had begun. The first torpedo struck at 10:32 a.m., frame 150, starboard side, below the waterline. The explosion shuddered through 72,000 tons of steel like a gong struck in a cathedral. Sailors in the forward engine room staggered as lights flickered. Damage control teams raced toward the breach, but before they arrived, 2 more torpedoes slammed home, frame 180 and frame 210. Water roared through ruptured compartments, flooding storage spaces and auxiliary machinery rooms. But Musashi's designers had anticipated this. Compartmentalization was obsessive. Bulkheads sealed automatically, pumps engaged. The ship listed 4 degrees to starboard, then stabilized as counterfloating balanced the load. Casualties were light. Structural integrity held. Captain Inaguchi allowed himself a breath. Then the dive bombers arrived. 18 Curtiss Helldivers plummeted from 12,000 feet at a 70-degree angle, sirens screaming. Anti-aircraft guns pivoted upward, filling the sky with shrapnel and tracer fire. 3 American planes exploded mid-dive, tumbling into the sea in flaming arcs. But 15 got through. Bombs don't care about armor when they fall from 2 miles up. A 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb punched through the forward deck, detonating inside the crew quarters. Another struck the superstructure, obliterating the main fire control director. A third hit near the base of the mainmast, severing communication lines and killing 12 sailors instantly. Smoke poured from 6 different fires. Musashi's guns kept firing. And the first wave hadn't even withdrawn yet. 10:50 a.m. 18 minutes of continuous combat. Musashi's crew fought with mechanical precision. Damage control parties extinguished fires with foam and seawater. Medics hauled wounded below decks. Ammunition runners maintained supply chains to the AA guns despite cratered walkways and buckled ladders. Executive Officer Kenkichi Kato moved through smoke and chaos, calmly redirecting resources where the ship bled worst. But the Americans weren't finished. They were rotating. As the first wave withdrew, many planes trailing smoke, some ditching in the sea, radar operators detected a second formation inbound. 50 aircraft this time, fresher crews, full ordnance loads. And they knew exactly where Musashi was wounded. This was the doctrine's cruelest edge. The enemy learned from each wave. Pilots debriefed on the radio even as they flew back to their carriers. Starboard side is compromised. AA guns near the mainmast are out. She's listing 4 degrees, hit her on the low side. The second wave split into 3 groups. Torpedo bombers again forced Musashi into evasive turns. But this time, dive bombers didn't wait for the ship to stabilize. They struck mid-turn, when her decks were angled and her guns couldn't track smoothly. Bombs fell like judgment. One penetrated the armored deck near turret 2. The explosion killed 60 men and jammed the turret's traverse mechanism. Musashi's main battery, her reason for existing, was slowly being silenced. By noon, Musashi had absorbed 8 torpedoes and 12 bomb hits. Her list had increased to 13 degrees. Speed was down to 22 knots and falling. Forward compartments were flooded beyond recovery. The bow rode noticeably low, pushing walls of water aside with each labored surge. Power fluctuated as seawater seeped toward generator rooms. Pumps screamed at maximum capacity, but couldn't match the ocean's relentless pressure. Still, she floated. Still, she fought. Captain Inaguchi messaged Admiral Kurita, commander of the task force. Musashi can continue. Damage is manageable. It was defiance more than assessment. He knew the truth. Every officer on the bridge knew. But admitting defeat while the ship still had a heartbeat was unthinkable. The third wave appeared at 12:15 p.m. This time, 65 aircraft from carriers Enterprise and Franklin. Coordination had become surgical. Torpedo bombers attacked from 4 compass points simultaneously, north, south, east, west, creating an inescapable geometry. No matter which way Musashi turned, torpedoes would find her. 3 more struck. Frame 90, frame 240, frame 300. The ship shuddered with each impact, her voice now a groan of tortured steel. Bulkheads buckled, welds split. Seawater gushed into spaces that were supposed to be dry. The list increased to 16 degrees.
Men began sliding across tilted decks, grabbing railings and stanchions to stay upright. And still, another wave was forming on the horizon.
1:30 p.m. 5 hours of combat. 11 torpedoes. 20 bomb hits. Musashi was dying by geometry and exhaustion. Her pumps, designed for short-duration damage, had been running non-stop for hours. Motors overheated. Seals failed. Water levels in critical compartments rose despite desperate efforts. The bow dipped further, forcing the stern higher until propeller blades briefly cleared the surface, thrashing foam instead of biting water. Speed, 12 knots. List, 18 degrees. Survivors would later describe the sound, a deep metallic moan resonating through every frame and rivet, as if the ship herself understood what was coming. Watertight doors became tombs as flooding trapped men in sealed compartments. Engineers opened valves manually, sacrificing lower decks to save upper spaces. It was triage on an industrial scale. The fourth wave struck at 2 p.m. 42 aircraft. But this time, resistance was crumbling. Half of Musashi's AA guns were destroyed or unmanned. Ammunition runners couldn't navigate the tilted, debris-choked passageways fast enough. Fire control systems were offline. Gunners aimed manually, tracking aircraft with exhausted, smoke-stung eyes. 4 more torpedoes found their mark. The list reached 23 degrees. Men on the high side could no longer stand without handholds. Below decks, tools, furniture, and bodies slid across compartments and slammed into bulkheads. The ship was capsizing in slow motion. Captain Inoguchi gave the order no commander wants to speak. Prepare to abandon ship. But even abandoning a dying battleship is a battle. Lifeboats on the low side were submerged or unreachable. Ropes and ladders tangled on angled decks. Men jumped into the oil-slicked water, swimming away from the hull to avoid being pulled under when she sank. Destroyers Kiyoshimo and Hamikaze maneuvered close, throwing lines and cargo nets over the side, but the sea was rough and the ship's list made rescue agonizingly slow. Inside Musashi, hundreds remained trapped. Damage control teams in sealed compartments, wounded in the infirmary 3 decks below. Engineers who'd stayed at their posts to keep auxiliary power running. Their voices echoed through voice tubes and intercoms, calm, professional, accepting. Some sang traditional songs. Others simply reported their status until the water rose past the microphones and the channels went silent. Captain Inoguchi stood on the bridge, refusing to leave. By naval tradition and personal honor, he would go down with his command. Executive Officer Kato stood beside him. They watched their crew, boys and veterans, conscripts and volunteers, struggle through the nightmare with discipline that bordered on the sacred. At 3:20 p.m., the list passed 30 degrees. Musashi's bow was submerged to the foredeck. Her massive guns pointed uselessly at the sky. Seawater poured through vents and hatches, flooding interior spaces faster than men could climb out. The end was minutes away. The fifth wave never even attacked. Pilots from carrier Lexington arrived overhead at 3:15 p.m., circling at 8,000 feet, and simply watched. There was nothing left to destroy. Musashi was a corpse still moving by momentum alone. Squadron leader Lieutenant Commander Robert Easley radioed back to the fleet, "Target is finished. Estimate sinking within the hour. Returning to base." It was a strange, almost respectful silence. At 3:35 p.m., Musashi's stern rose out of the water at a 40-degree angle. The 4 massive propellers spun uselessly in the air, still driven by dying engines deep in the hull. Survivors in the water watched as the ship they'd called home tilted vertical.
863 feet of steel standing upright like a monument, like a gravestone marking its own death. Captain Inaguchi saluted. Executive Officer Kato saluted. Around them, the remaining bridge crew did the same. Then the sea took her. Musashi plunged bow first into the Sibuyan Sea, accelerating as trapped air burst from hatches in explosive gasps. The suction pulled swimmers under. The shock wave rippled across the surface. And then, silence. No explosion, no fireball. Just a massive whirlpool of churning water, debris, and oil, slowly flattening into an unnatural calm. It was 7:35 p.m. The largest battleship ever sunk had taken 19 torpedoes, 17 bombs, and 10 hours to kill. But the doctrine had worked.
What sank Musashi wasn't American bravery, though the pilots showed plenty. It wasn't superior weaponry. Japanese torpedoes were actually more advanced. It wasn't even the armor-piercing bombs, devastating as they were. It was mathematics. The coordinated anvil strike doctrine turned aerial combat into an equation. X carriers times Y aircraft times Z waves equals dead battleship. No single attack could penetrate Musashi's defenses, but 20 attacks, delivered in rotating, overlapping waves from multiple vectors with no recovery time? The ship's system simply couldn't keep up. Pumps designed for single torpedo hits couldn't handle 11. Damage control teams trained for isolated fires couldn't contain 20 bomb impacts. Anti-aircraft crews mentally prepared for one major engagement burned out after 5. Human endurance, mechanical tolerance, and structural integrity all had limits. The Americans found them and exceeded them systematically. Admiral Kurita, watching from flagship Yamato 10 miles away, sent a final message. Musashi fought with honor. Her sacrifice will not be forgotten. But privately, he knew the truth. This wasn't a duel. It wasn't even a battle in the traditional sense. It was an execution. Clinical, efficient, and utterly one-sided. The age of the battleship was over. Musashi's sinking was simply the moment the Imperial Japanese Navy could no longer deny it. The carriers had won. The future belonged to the sky. Of Musashi's 2,399-man crew, approximately 1,023 died. Some drowned in flooded compartments. Some were killed by bombs and shell fragments. Some went down with the ship by choice. Destroyers rescued 1,376 survivors from the oil-slicked water, men who'd clung to debris for hours, who'd watched their ship die meter by meter, who'd lost friends and brothers to explosions they couldn't prevent and forces they couldn't fight. Among the dead, Captain Toshihira Inoguchi, Executive Officer Kenkichi Kato, and most of the senior bridge staff. Their bodies were never recovered. They rest still, somewhere in the darkness 4,430 feet below the Sibuyan Sea. The survivors were distributed among the remaining task force ships. Many would die in subsequent battles. Kurita's fleet continued toward Leyte Gulf, only to retreat after the battle off Samar. Others would survive the war, carrying memories they rarely spoke about. But they all understood what they'd witnessed. Musashi hadn't been defeated by better sailors or superior courage. She'd been defeated by doctrine, by a system that turned air power into a mathematical weapon. It was industrial warfare at its purest. Not warriors clashing, but machines grinding against machines until one side's numbers simply ran out. The Americans had invented a way to kill legends. And the Pacific War would never be the same. News of Musashi's sinking rippled through both fleets with different meanings. For the Americans, it was validation. The coordinated anvil strike doctrine wasn't theory anymore. It was proven battlefield reality. Carrier task forces could sink battleships without ever coming within gun range.
Admiral Halsey's staff immediately began refining the technique, creating standardized attack patterns and timing protocols that would be used for the rest of the war. The lesson was clear. Concentrate your air power, rotate your waves, and even the mightiest ship will fall. For the Japanese, it was catastrophe. Musashi and Yamato had been symbols of national power, proof that Japan could match or exceed Western industrial might. Losing one wasn't just a tactical defeat, it was a psychological blow that shattered assumptions about invincibility and technological superiority. If Musashi could be sunk, nothing was safe. Morale across the fleet cratered. Strategically, Operation Shogo collapsed. Admiral Kurita's task force, already bloodied, retreated from Leyte Gulf before inflicting significant damage. The Philippines would fall to MacArthur. Japan's defensive perimeter contracted further. The home islands came within range of American bombers. But perhaps the deepest impact was philosophical. Naval warfare had fundamentally changed. Battleships, the queens of the sea for centuries, were now just targets. Armor and guns didn't matter if you couldn't control the sky. The Pacific War proved it. Musashi's wreck, resting in darkness, became a monument to the end of an era.
In 2015, 71 years after she sank, billionaire explorer Paul Allen found Musashi's wreck. His research vessel positioned itself above coordinates derived from survivor testimonies and historical records. A remotely operated vehicle descended through 4,430 feet of black water, its lights cutting through silt and time. And there she was, upright, remarkably intact, her massive guns still trained skyward as if waiting for an enemy that would never come. Video footage showed barnacle-encrusted armor, collapsed superstructure, and the immense scale of a ship that once seemed unstoppable. Fish darted through compartments where men had lived and died. The wreck had become an artificial reef, life flourishing where destruction had once reigned absolute. But what Musashi represents goes beyond her physical remains. She's a reminder that in war, innovation beats tradition, that quantity and coordination can overwhelm quality and courage, that the weapon you refuse to adapt to will eventually kill you. The U.S. Navy understood this in 1944 and rewrote naval doctrine accordingly. The Imperial Japanese Navy clung to the past and paid the price. In the end, Musashi didn't lose to better steel or bigger bombs. She lost to a system, a way of thinking that turned air power into unstoppable force. If this story moved you, share it. History's greatest lessons often hide in its deepest waters. Every event, number, and character in this documentary has been verified through historical and documented sources. In the silence of the deep Pacific, Musashi waits, a steel cathedral marking the moment the world changed forever.